Chapter 22, the spread of Islam. So now we're focusing on how the religion of Islam got started and how it was able to spread rapidly throughout the Middle East and then into Europe and other places as well. So quickly here. Arabia. Now the Arabian Peninsula is this area here, primarily Saudi Arabia today, with some other countries too, but it's located between Northeast Africa, which is over here. We got here Egypt and Sudan, and over here we have to the north, well actually over here we have the rest of the Asia. So it's this peninsula, and it juts out, surrounded by the ocean on three sides, or the seas on three sides. So it's pretty isolated on some level. It's dry. It's a desert mostly, and people who live there are called Arabs. And the Arabs lived a Bedouin lifestyle, which is a lifestyle which primarily they were herders of animals. They roamed the desert for grasslands, basically looking for a place to feed their animals. Around 600, people believed in many different gods, and they fought each other for the land. Particularly places like over here we have Medina, and then we have Mecca and different places like that. The reason why there are cities here is because that's where there are wells that people can use, and obviously wells being very important in the desert culture. So they did fight over those areas. In Western Arabia, there's an area called the Hejaz, which is primarily again in this area here, and that's the birthplace of the religion of Islam that spread quickly in the region. So Islam means the act of submitting to the will of God. Islam was started by an Arab merchant named Muhammad, who believers say was the prophet of Allah. And this is his symbol, the crescent moon with a star over it, and you'll see that in a lot of flags from countries with the primarily Muslim population. Muslims are those who follow the Islamic religion. It's just a term. Sometimes people get confused that the term is Muslim for people who follow Islam. And Islam had a huge impact on the ancient world and is a major religion still today. Now Mecca was the largest city in the Hejaz in the 500s. Many Arabs were pilgrims who visited. There is a religious shrine, you can see it right in the background there. It's called the Kaaba. It's much different today, and all these are people in circles, and this is during the Hajj, which we'll get to in a bit, the great mosque in Mecca. And Arab pilgrims, they visited this to worship the many gods in the Kaaba, and very nature-centered worship in a lot of ways. The Arabs believed that Adam had built the Kaaba and that Abraham had rebuilt it once to the one God, but other gods started to be worshipped there, so it was a place where different people could meet up. And Muhammad was a merchant who was very successful in the caravan business originally. When he was born, his parents died relatively quickly after that, and then he was left with just his uncle being in charge. And so he was sort of a member of every family on some level, and he was known as someone who would settle disputes, and he actually caught the eye of a wealthy widow named Khadija, who he married, and when he married her, he became wealthy because she was a wealthy merchant. He thought many people acted inappropriately by drinking, gambling, and there was just corruption, so he isolated himself like a lot of people did and fasted and tried to help solve these problems and tried to figure out ways of solving these problems. Now, Muhammad believed that the God of the Jews and the Christians was the one God people should follow. Now, Muslims believe that Muhammad had a vision in which an angel, the angel Gabriel, told Muhammad the will of God, and he started to preach these ideas to the people, and we'll get to what those ideas primarily are in a minute. His ideas included giving money to the poor, preparing for the day of judgment, behaving well, and worshiping God. He believed that people had sort of strayed away from these central ideas. Now, the leaders of Mecca were concerned because basically Muhammad started preaching that people were not following the instructions that God wanted. So they basically chased him and his followers out. They kind of threatened him, and since Muhammad did not have the clan protection because his uncle died that had protected him, that led to him basically being sort of isolated, and eventually, like I said, he gets chased out. But he gets invited to this place called Yathrib in 622, and because they have a lot of problems there, and he's viewed as this person who can settle problems, so he's invited there, and he kind of takes this as an opportunity as well. Now, the Muslim calendar starts in 622 AD, but dates the years according to what's known as the year of migration, or a non-hijra, a no-hijra. Sort of like the Hebrew calendar dates it according to the beginning of the world, and the Christian calendar dates things according to the birth of Jesus. So now Yathrib was renamed later Medina, which means the city of the prophet. Muhammad became an important political and religious leader in Medina, and later on, the people in Mecca, they were kind of freaking out that he was going to be a strong person there, and they were worried that he was going to continue to cause problems for them, so they sent an army against him. And their army was much larger, but Medina's army was able to defeat Mecca, and Muhammad comes back. He sort of semi-conquers Mecca, and when he does that, the people, they all agree to become Muslim, because they kind of see in his victories this idea that, oh, you know what, maybe God's behind him. And so he actually goes into the Kaaba and he smashes all the idols, and just that's the main focus. He doesn't slaughter people like some people expect him to. And Muhammad, he dies in 632 AD. Now, the Quran is the most important document in Islam. It is believed to be the direct word from God given to Muhammad. Quran is in Arabic, and you can see it's very pretty in this particular version. It tells how people should live their lives, including the 5 pillars of faith, which are kind of the 5 things that hold up the Muslim faith. Now, these things are, the first one is to recite. That's the central prayer of Islam. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. MU I just used for Muhammad. You're supposed to pray 5 times a day, a relatively short set of prayers most of the time, and you face in the direction of Mecca, and that was just something where Muhammad decided that Mecca was that central to the faith. You're supposed to give zakah, which is charity to needy people, and to fast during the daylight hours of the month of Ramadan, because that is when Ramadan is the month that Muhammad started to receive the Quran. And if you can, make the Hajj a religious journey to Mecca at least once. And back a bit ago, that you saw the picture of that mosque with all those people around there. That's during the Hajj, when all these people are focused on that. Now, Muslims are led in prayer by an imam, and on Friday noon prayers, that's kind of the most important day of the week, if you put it that way, in terms of prayers. They go to a mosque frequently, or a Muslim house of worship. That's what a mosque is. Quran promises all that will obey the rules will go to paradise upon their death. Now, when Muhammad died, people needed someone else to lead them, and they chose a caliph, or a successor. Muhammad's father-in-law, a guy named Abu Bakr, was the first caliph. Along with the next 3, he ruled relatively well from Medina, and they were called the rightly guided caliphs. Now, there was a lot of fighting in between. As a matter of fact, at least one of them got assassinated from the fighting back and forth, but they were able to expand Islam throughout the Middle East. Warriors who helped to conquer the other areas believed that if they died in the service of Islam, they would go to paradise, because they were dying for religious reasons. If people surrendered, they could keep their land, but if they did not, they would not get to keep it. So people did surrender quite a bit. And their armies were pretty good too. So the last of the rightly guided caliphs was a guy named Ali, and he died. When he died, a new caliph moved the capital from Medina to Damascus, and he started something called the Umayyad dynasty. The title of caliph now became hereditary, and the new leaders sort of ruled more like kings instead of religious leaders. And so that kind of actually is interesting how it changed the culture of Islam. The dynasty ended when some of the people who were not born Muslims complained that they were not treated the same as those who had been born Muslims, and that caused a lot of problems. So the one really important thing to understand today is not just all this stuff about Islam, but there's a split in Islam. Islam became divided into 2 groups. The first group were the Shiites, and they believed that only those related to Ali should be the caliph, because Ali was related to Muhammad. And so they believed only those related to Muhammad should become the caliphs. The second group, called the Sunni, believed the caliph should just be someone who was just a good person, a good leader. And that's why they believe the rightly guided caliphs, those like Abu Bakr, it was fine for him to be caliph. So this is really important to understand today. For a country like Iraq, you've got this different groups of people that are all over the place, and so you got the Sunnis and the Shiites, and most of the world, Muslim world, is Sunni. There are Shiites, but they don't get along real well in a lot of cases. And when you hear about Muslims killing Muslims, it's generally over that issue in the world. Iraq and Iran are primarily Shiite. Saudi Arabia is primarily Sunni, so is most of the rest of the world, but Shiite community is primarily in Iraq and Iran. Now the Abbasids, another group called the Abbasids, conquered the Umayyads, and when they did that, they moved the capital to a new city called Baghdad, over here, where it's in Iran, excuse me, it's in Iraq, not Iran, and they were in power from about 750 to 1258 BC. And Arabs became a term for anyone who spoke Arabic within the empire. If a new government official called a vizier was set up to help the caliph rule. Now, instead of conquering new land, the Abbasids, that's what the A stands for, focused on developing trade and learning. And this is why it's called a golden age of Islam. People spread knowledge in different groups of people, like topics like farming, literature, and math. There's a lot of trade that goes on. The empire, however, though, became too big for one person to rule it, and they started actually acting somewhat more like Europeans, and eventually broke up into different kingdoms. Baghdad was eventually conquered by the Persians. So, now the golden age of Muslim Spain, the Moors, this group here, Spain, it actually became a separate place because when the Abbasids take over, the last Umayyad leader of Spain remained in charge there. So the Moors were a group of Muslims that conquered Spain from the Goths. Spain was a center of culture that allowed Christians and Muslims and Jews to live together. It was actually a lot freer than later on when Ferdinand and Isabella come along and they expel all the Jews and Muslims. So that just kind of interesting in terms of how people view that. So there's sort of a golden age of Muslim Spain as well. Now, in Islamic life, the life of women improved due to Islam because it was viewed that raising women was just as important as raising boys. And women were allowed to own property, but men could still marry up to 4 women, and if he could provide for them. Now, this is obviously a difference between Christianity and Judaism, that we believe in monogamy. If you're a Christian or a Jew, that's the difference. And in like a country like the United States, you're only allowed to have one wife, but in Arab countries, where Islam is the main religion, they still do allow up to 4 women to be married to a single man. So education was very important for both men and women. Education focused on Islam and the Quran. And Muslims traveled to many different places and brought Islam with them. Now, some of the major things that Arab contributions included that they preserved a lot of the Greek and Roman knowledge that would have been lost during that period that the Europeans called the Dark Age. That was a period when it was a golden age of material going on. So Arabs were also, they started chemistry, something called alchemy, and trying to focus on that, turning silver into gold. But that's the basis of chemistry. Arabs were good astronomers who realized the tidal patterns of the size of the Earth. They also created algebra, solving for unknowns, and used the 0 through 9 system instead of Roman numerals, which would be really confusing today. Doctors set up and published important medical textbooks first, had the first pharmacy, realized blood circulates, started to develop ideas on how contagious diseases are spread. They also wrote some important literature like the Arabian Nights, 1001 Arabian Nights, which includes the stories like Sinbad the Sailor, Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, Aladdin, and a whole range of those. And the Rubaiyat, a series of poems. And Islamic art is interesting because it's primarily geometric. And it doesn't have a lot of images of people or things in there because it's believed that you can't create things like God does. So that's where we're at, and we are done.